Yeah, hello and welcome. This is Happy Father's Day for those of you in the United States. And I am John Mason. Today I am sitting in for Bob Trask, who's out on an adventure. And this is your weekly recess. My understanding and interpretation of the weekly recess is that it's a chance for Bob and the support of this community to offer you even more perspective and consciousness that you can take with you through your life so that you can be of even greater service day to day. Today, we are going to be talking about eternity. Now, Bob asked me to talk about any topic I wanted to, and I was going to talk about uh, the advantages of adaptation. Then he said, "Oh, we're going to talk about eternity. Can you fit in some information about NDEs, near-death experiences?" I happen to be an expert in my own house on that, so I am going to be chatting a lot about that today. But getting back to the Father's Day thing, I want you to know that it's a in the United States, this was created to celebrate fathers, to balance out Mother's Day, and it's a really important thing for each and every one of us because almost every one of us is a miracle. And it's a miracle that was created by the union of a sperm and an egg, and we don't even understand it. A body was created. In my opinion, this is a vehicle for our souls to move around in the human drama, for us to learn, to grow, to support, to love, to find joy, and to deal with the dramas of human existence, including fear and anxiety. The reason why I mention that is because I think that at the heart of what we're going to be talking about today, if we can have some perspective on life and living, then we can reduce our fear and anxiety and get on with finding love and joy. Bob told me that eternity was a topic that was going to be carried on for the month. And I did a little research and I found out that the definition of eternity is infinite, unending, and perhaps immortality. That's a very long time. For almost every human being, time and space are an issue for us. They're also a human limitation. So, immortality to a human is excessively long. It seems to go on forever. That's my humorous perspective on this. But to our soul or our spirit, eternity and immortality are just what is. That's what we do. And with our immortality and the infinity that our existence is, never beginning and never ending, we come to have experiences in life to develop, to move in consciousness ever higher. Let's take a step back. Physicists who are by and large intellectually superior and have a much higher pay grade than I do have suggested that matter and energy in our world are neither created nor destroyed. They just change form. I don't know if that's true. I don't know if no matter or energy can be created any more than what exists in our universe, but that is the suggestion that physicists offer us. Our soul cannot be created nor destroyed. It's my belief and understanding, perhaps my knowing, that forever our soul, our spirit has begun, continues, and will never end within the higher realms of the divine spirit. Now, with that said, we're going to talk a little bit about near-death experiences. We're going to talk about, which are called NDEs. We're going to talk about a term called STEs, which is spiritually transformative experiences. And I'll give you a little bit more of the history on where that came from a little bit later in the presentation. But I want to tell a couple of stories. The first story that I want to tell is about myself as a 19-year-old student. That was a couple of centuries ago, obviously. But when I was 19, I was a student at UCLA, and I had begun my studies at UCLA, which is a college in Los Angeles. Before I turned 18, I was 17 when I entered. And 2 years later, right after my 19th birthday, I found myself in a class and with a group of students that were a little bit alternative and very oppositional. Now, being oppositional really is attractive to me. If you don't know me, just know that I try not to fit in as often as possible. At any rate, we went away on a student retreat. We got there on a Friday. We were going to stay for the weekend. And on Friday night, we kind of horsed around, partied, had a good time. That's what students do. And I was with this group of people. I was probably one of the youngest, if not the youngest person on this retreat. There were probably 100, 150 students. And we kind of partied on Friday night. And on Saturday morning, we woke up and there was some disappointment that we had not used our time better on Friday evening and had just fooled around. And so to to counter that, they decided to break into discussion groups. And there were, I think, 6 questions, and you could pick the question that you wanted to go to and sit in on a discussion and do some work in a serious way with other students in the room. The 6 questions, I don't even remember. Some were political, some were economic. Someone suggested that we talk about death and dying. Now, this person was interested in death and dying, was going to lead the room. And he'd suggested that because I think he had run across Ella Kubler-Ross's book on death and dying and thought that as students, we ought to examine or talk about that and chat about that and what was our opinion. For whatever reason, guidance, which always has served me, it's guided me, it's protected me, allowed me to consider that this was the thing that was of greatest interest. So I went to the room and I was sitting there with about 20 some odd people. They weren't that odd. I was about as odd as anybody there. And you have to know that this about me. I was not particularly mature. I was not particularly sophisticated. I had never considered talking in a group about death and dying or the ramifications of end of life stuff. I was just 19, barely 19, and I was going to live forever. So I was pretty innocent and naive. I hadn't done any reading or studying about this at the time. What the guy in the front of the room suggested was that we do a guided visualization. A guided visualization, a meditation. I said, sure. And the guy in the front of the room tells everybody to get comfortable, to lie back, to get relaxed and comfortable, to breathe slowly, to try to find their way into the present moment, to try to eliminate mental, emotional distractions for that moment in time. I did what I was told. I was feeling safe and comfortable. He suggested then that from a place of relaxation or meditation, that what we ought to consider doing, and I assumed everybody was going to do this, is just get out of your body, just sort of rise above your body. And I was there doing what I was told. And I was looking down on my body and I was saying, oh, that's interesting. And I just started moving a little bit further away because he said, go find out what death is all about. Sure, why not? I didn't care. That was what I was told to do, and I was willing to do it. So I pulled away, got further and further away. It looked like my body was getting smaller and smaller. And at some point, I turned, faced 180-degree difference, and headed off into space. I headed off into the void. And I got further and further along. I wasn't scared, excited. I just did what I was told. I got to what I knew, and I don't know how I knew this. I got to what I knew was halfway to death or dying. I stopped there for a minute and thought, oh, this is pretty interesting. And it felt pretty comfortable. In front of me, this was in darkness. In front of me, there was a dark horizon. I knew on the other side of the horizon was the higher realms, death. I didn't call it the higher realms. I called it, well, it's death. And emanating from the other side of the horizon was a warmth that was very enfolding, peaceful, accepting. I mean, it was really attractive. And I said, this is great. Now, in the higher realms, my understanding, my knowing is that there isn't somebody who comes on a loudspeaker and talks to you. What you know or what you learn or what you communicate is kind of telepathic. So the thoughts were coming in my head. And the feeling that went along with this state of being halfway to death was complete calmness, complete freedom, peace, acceptance, and a concept that can't find its way into my human words of unconditional love. I felt embraced. I felt supported. I felt there was nothing that I could do that would cause any problem or that would be judged in a negative way. And I thought, this is great. I said, I want to stay here. And then that telepathic thought came to my mind that said, you can't stay here. You're not done. You have to go back. And I'm oppositional. So I said, no, I'm staying. You can't make me go. I want to stay. This feels good. And the telepathic information from guidance or the divine spirit or whoever said to me, no, you have to go back. You're not done. Other than being oppositional, not wanting to leave, this was just a lovely experience. And then telepathically, they said, when it's your time, you can come back. You can be here. And at that point, I said, well, okay. And I went and I got back into my body. And I wasn't excited. It was calm. I knew that everybody in the room had done the same thing, so it was no big deal. And the guy in the front of the room eventually said, okay, wake up. What happened? And we all kind of come back to the room. And he said, does anybody want to tell the story? What happened to you when you were out of your body? And I looked around the room. I was one of the youngest people in the room. And I looked around the room and nobody raised their hand. And I'm kind of impatient. I couldn't wait any longer. So I raised my hand and I said, okay, I'll tell you what happened to me. And the guy in the front of the room said, okay. kid, what happened? And I said, well, like everyone else, I assumed, you told me to relax and then you told me to get out of my body. And I went halfway to death and dying on the other side of this dark area. There was emanating warmth and love, acceptance, calmness, peace, freedom. And it was something I didn't want to leave. And I didn't stop and think about it. I just told the story, matter of fact. And the guy in the front of the room, I looked at him and his eyes got really big. And he kind of started, he said, that's amazing. And at that point, it dawned on me that I had had a life-changing experience. From my naive, innocent, immature, oppositional self, I realized that I didn't put words to it at that time. I had been gifted by guidance and divine spirit with a spectacular story, spectacular experience. And I came later to realize I am supposed to tell that story. I am supposed to share that wisdom, that knowledge, that information with other people because so many of us live in fear and anxiety. And the fear and anxiety, the very foundation of that is the human mind and ego realizing that it has limited time. We're trapped in time and space, and it's not going to be here forever. And they'll do anything to protect itself. If we can give people perspective and wisdom from that experience, and if you can witness it, then maybe you can resonate with a sense that death is not the enemy and dying is not scary. In fact, it can be very attractive when it's your time to transition from this body, from this life. I think many people have had these experiences. So years later, this is the next part of my story. Years later, I started doing some reading and I came across a book called Life After Life by Raymond Moody. And he was one of the original researchers who started interviewing people who were referred by medical hospital doctor organizations. And in the late 60s and 70s, he started interviewing them, people who had died but been resuscitated or died and somehow were revived and came back. And they all had a story to tell. And he pried the story out of them. He started something that other researchers, including Ken Ring, started doing even more research. And he wrote the book, Life at Death. I'm going to put all of these resources into the description on the video if you want that information, the dates and the authors and all that. But Ken Ring went further than Raymond Moody, but he had been inspired by Raymond Moody. Raymond Moody interviewed about 80 people, more or less, more than 80. Ken Ring started gathering 300 interviews with people who had had NDEs, near-death experiences. And the reason why I'm telling you this is because I started reading these interviews or the excerpts of what came out of the interviews, and there was something very common to each and every one of them. Number one, everybody who came back to tell the story had a different perspective on life. They weren't afraid of death, and so the anxiety and fear of death and dying was reduced or eliminated. Everybody had a unique experience. They all experienced it in their own way based on their culture, their information. They found words or descriptions of these places, but there was a little bit of familiarity with them. They were all peaceful, non-judgmental, accepting, free, and unconditional love, which doesn't, it's just a very hard concept because it doesn't translate into human words. And it's very hard for the human mind to really get what complete, unconditional warmth and love is all about. Now, Moody and Ken Ring and a couple of other people created an organization in the early 1980s called IANDS, IANDS, International Association of Near-Death Studies. I'll have references for that in the description. They created an organization in the 80s, and it supported and allowed people who had NDEs to share their experiences, because I guarantee not one person comes back, and even though they may be scared and it may be difficult to talk about, they, most of them came back with a need to tell the story. Years later, IONS created STE as an abbreviation for spiritually transformative experiences for people like me who didn't die but had an experience that kicked in such a major way that it was life changing. I told you that story about my STE when I was 19 years old. And like these kind of experiences, it doesn't extinguish. I can remember exactly what happened. I can remember the feelings. I can't always put them in words or describe them any better. And now that I'm mature and I've had a little experience, I've told the story many times, it sounds better and better all the time just because I'm more comfortable with it. And I know how to emphasize what needs to be emphasized. So ions exists, and my friend Paula, who's on the call several years ago, said IONS is having their annual conference in Bellevue, which is very near where I live in the state of Washington. I want to go to it. Do you want to go? And I said, Paula, I'll go anywhere with you. But she drags me to this event. It was kind of traumatic. I lost a hearing aid on the way down, whatever. And I got there, and there was 350 people for 4 days in the conference. You couldn't get on an elevator without somebody with their eyes this wide, not asking, do you believe in NDEs, near-death experience? Not asking you if you were curious at all about it. They had to launch into their story immediately because they were loved and supported by people, and everybody was sharing this energy back and forth. And I met Eben Alexander, who is a neurosurgeon who wrote the book Proof of Heaven. Again, it's referenced in in the description when the video comes out, and he told his story, which sounded familiar, but he was very scientific, he was medical, he was conservative. He really began to open doors to the medical community that this wasn't just woo-woo stuff. Lots of people were doing this research. And then my friend Ellen came down from Bellingham. Hi, Ellen. Love you. And she needed to meet with Eben Alexander. And so I set up a meeting, and Ellen floats into the lobby. Eben just happened to be standing there. I was there. I put the two of them together, and I said to Eben, you got to meet with this lady. She is an earth angel, and you have to know her. And they went off for an hour and had a great conversation. I don't know what they talked about. Ellen is, she just so pushy with her love and spiritual feelings. The next day, I don't know if you know this, Ellen, Eben Alexander thanked me for putting the two of you together because he loved the time spent with you. And it was an amazing experience. I'm going to need to wind down a little bit because our time for this recording and this reset meeting is coming to a close. what is your takeaway? You know, why is it important to have near-death experience stories? Why is it important to witness these stories? And it's because if you're going to reset, if you're going to be a person that moves forward in the world, if you can have that perspective, your anxiety and fear can be reduced. But even more importantly, it's great when you can reach out and support another human who may have fear and anxiety, who may want to know that death is not scary, that we come back over and over again for eternity. And each time we try to raise our consciousness, we try to come back to serve and support the fellow travelers that we meet as we walk through our lives. And Bob Trask, who I know and love dearly, decided that I was important for me to come and share some of those stories. And on this meeting, I will say, if you go to bobtrask.com, you have an opportunity to support him and the work that he does in bringing consciousness, perspective. His service is to allow people to move even further so that each and every day we can wake up and take steps to move in the most positive directions. So again, my name is John Mason, and I'm going to thank all of you for coming. Each and every one of you is a miracle. Each and every one of you is loved. And I'm going to just sign off by saying, please take the wisdom and this energy, do your research, and allow yourself to share your stories, to be of service to other people, to witness them and support them as they move along their pathway. You are a blessing. Thank you for the time.